The rescue helicopters were taking heavy fire as they attempted to land in a small clearing near the trapped Marines. Sarah could see tracer rounds streaking up toward the aircraft as insurgents focused their anti-aircraft weapons on preventing the evacuation. One helicopter was forced to pull away after taking multiple hits, leaving smoke trailing from its engine. The remaining aircraft continued its approach despite the intense enemy fire, showing the courage of aircrews who risked their lives to save trapped ground forces. Sarah provided covering fire as other Marines began moving toward the helicopter landing zone. Each movement drew immediate response from enemy positions, forcing them to bound from cover to cover in short rushes, while others suppressed insurgent firing positions. Sarah alternated between firing at enemies and helping wounded Marines move toward the extraction point. Knowing that every second counted before the helicopter would be forced to leave, a sniper bullet struck Sarah in the shoulder, spinning her around and causing her to drop her rifle. The impact felt like being hit with a sledgehammer, and blood immediately began soaking through her uniform. She retrieved her weapon with her good arm and continued firing, knowing that showing weakness would encourage insurgents to concentrate their fire on her position. Adrenaline masked most of the pain, but she could feel her strength beginning to fade. Corporal Martinez was unconscious from blood loss, making it impossible for him to move on his own. Sarah and another Marine grabbed him under the arms and began dragging him toward the helicopter, exposing themselves to intense crossfire from multiple enemy positions. Bullets struck the ground around them as they struggled across the open area, moving as fast as possible while carrying a wounded comrade, who couldn't help with his own evacuation. The helicopter pilot was performing an incredible feat of flying, maintaining his position despite constant enemy fire while his door gunners returned fire to suppress insurgent positions. Sarah could see bullet holes appearing in the aircraft's fuselage as they fought to reach the extraction point. The rotorwash created a storm of dust and debris that provided some concealment but also made it difficult to see approaching threats. Another Marine fell as they neared the helicopter, struck by sniper fire from a nearby rooftop. Sarah realized they were being systematically targeted by insurgents who were trying to prevent any successful evacuation. She turned and fired several shots at the sniper position, seeing muzzle flashes from the window where the enemy shooter was located. Her shots struck the building around the window, forcing the sniper to take cover temporarily. Sarah reached the helicopter and helped push Corporal Martinez into the aircraft before turning back to provide covering fire for other Marines still making their way across the open area. A medic immediately began working on Martinez while the door gunners continued firing at insurgent positions. Sarah could see that the aircraft was taking serious damage, with fluid leaking from several locations and warning lights visible in the cockpit. The helicopter pilot shouted that they needed to leave immediately before the aircraft became unflyable. Several Marines were still trapped in positions around the original ambush site, unable to reach the extraction point due to intense enemy fire. Sarah realized that not everyone would make it out on this flight, and some would have to wait for another rescue attempt if the damaged helicopters could even return safely to base. As the helicopter began to lift off, Sarah saw insurgents emerging from buildings to fire at the departing aircraft. She leaned out of the open door and returned fire with her rifle, trying to suppress enemy positions long enough for them to gain altitude and speed. Tracer rounds continued to streak past the helicopter as it climbed above the buildings, some striking the aircraft with metallic impacts that rang through the passenger compartment. A rocket-propelled grenade streaked past the helicopter's tail rotor, missing by only a few feet. The pilot took evasive action, banking sharply to avoid additional anti-aircraft fire while maintaining enough altitude to clear the highest buildings. Sarah watched through the open door as Fallujah fell away below them, seeing muzzle flashes from insurgent positions throughout the neighborhood where the ambush had occurred. The flight back to base seemed to take forever as Sarah helped a medic treat wounded Marines in the cramped helicopter cabin. Corporal Martinez was stable but needed immediate surgery to repair damage from his gunshot wounds. Other Marines had various injuries from shrapnel and bullets, but most would recover with proper medical treatment. Sarah's own shoulder wound was painful but not life-threatening, though she was losing blood and beginning to feel dizzy. As they approached the base, Sarah could see emergency vehicles and medical personnel waiting at the landing zone. The helicopter touched down heavily, its damaged systems barely maintaining flight capability. Medical teams immediately rushed forward to evacuate the wounded Marines, beginning emergency treatment even before the aircraft engines shut down. Sarah insisted on walking off the helicopter under her own power, though she accepted help from medics who guided her toward the field hospital. Captain Rodriguez's voice came through the radio with new orders. A relief force was en route, but Sarah's squad needed to hold their position for at least 20 more minutes. 20 minutes felt like an eternity when bullets were constantly flying overhead and their ammunition supplies were dwindling. Sarah looked at her wounded squad mate and the other Marines around her, seeing determination mixed with fear in their faces. They would hold the position because they had no other choice. Sarah took charge of redistributing ammunition among the squad members, ensuring that those in the best firing positions had enough rounds to continue suppressing enemy positions. She gave some of her own magazines to Marines who had expended more ammunition, keeping only what she needed for immediate threats. Leadership in combat often meant making quick decisions about resource allocation that could determine who lived and who died. The insurgents seemed to sense that the Americans were running low on ammunition because their attacks became more aggressive. Groups of fighters began moving closer to the Marine positions, using covering fire from snipers and machine gunners. Sarah could see them darting between buildings, getting closer with each movement. She aimed carefully, conserving her ammunition while trying to stop the most dangerous advances toward their position. A new threat appeared when insurgents began throwing hand grenades from nearby rooftops. The first grenade landed short, exploding harmlessly against the street, but the second one bounced off a wall and rolled toward their position. Sarah shouted a warning and dove for cover as the explosion sent shrapnel flying through the air. One piece struck her in the leg, but adrenaline kept her fighting despite the pain and bleeding. Corporal Martinez was getting weaker from blood loss, and Sarah knew they needed medical attention soon. She used her field bandages to create better pressure dressings for his wounds, but without proper medical supplies and evacuation, his condition would continue to deteriorate. The other Marines were also showing signs of fatigue and stress as the firefight continued beyond what anyone had expected when they left base that morning. Sarah noticed that the enemy fire was becoming more coordinated, suggesting that insurgent leaders were directing the battle and possibly bringing in reinforcements. Machine gun positions were being established in buildings that provided better fields of fire, and snipers were moving to locations where they could target Marines who tried to change positions. The ambush was evolving into a sustained battle that would test every aspect of their training and endurance. The distinctive sound of helicopters in the distance brought hope, but also new dangers. Sarah knew that insurgents often had rocket-propelled grenades and anti-aircraft weapons that could threaten rescue helicopters. The approaching aircraft would draw intense fire as they tried to reach the trapped Marines, creating additional chaos and potentially resulting in more casualties if they were shot down in the dense urban environment. Enemy fire suddenly intensified as insurgents realized that American reinforcements were approaching. Sarah pressed herself against the concrete barrier as bullets struck all around their position with increasing frequency. She could hear the helicopters getting closer, their rotor noise mixing with gunfire and explosions to create a deafening cacophony that made radio communication nearly impossible. Hand signals became the primary way to coordinate with other squad members. A rocket-propelled grenade struck the building behind their position, sending chunks of concrete and metal flying through the air. One large piece struck Sarah in the back, knocking her forward and leaving her momentarily stunned. When she tried to get back into firing position, she discovered that her rifle had been damaged by debris. She looked around for weapons from wounded Marines, knowing that being unarmed in their situation meant certain death. Sarah crawled over to where Corporal Martinez was lying and took his rifle, checking to ensure it was functional and loaded. The weapon felt different in her hands, but all Marines trained on the same equipment so she could adapt quickly. She returned to her firing position just as insurgents began another coordinated assault on their location, moving between buildings, while covering each other with automatic weapons fire. The sound of the rescue helicopters was now directly overhead, but Sarah couldn't see them through the smoke and dust that filled the air. She knew pilots would be looking for ways to safely extract the trapped Marines, without exposing their aircraft to enemy fire for extended periods. However, the dense urban environment and intense combat made any rescue attempt extremely dangerous for both the air crews and the Marines they were trying to save. The explosion came without warning. Sarah's world turned into chaos as the building they were watching erupted in flames and smoke. The blast was so powerful that it knocked her backward against the concrete barrier, temporarily stunning her and filling her ears with ringing noise. Through the smoke and debris, she could see that the entire operation had been a carefully planned ambush. The target building had been rigged with explosives, and now insurgents were firing from multiple positions around the area. Gunfire erupted from rooftops, windows, and doorways that had seemed empty moments before. Muzzle flashes lit up the darkness like deadly fireflies, and bullets began striking the concrete around Sarah's position. She realized that insurgents had been waiting in hidden positions throughout the neighborhood, using the fake intelligence to lure American forces into a kill zone. The mission had been compromised from the beginning, and now her squad was trapped in the middle of a coordinated attack. Sarah's training took over despite the confusion and danger surrounding her. She pressed herself against the concrete barrier and began returning fire toward the nearest muzzle flashes. Her rifle bucked against her shoulder as she fired controlled bursts at insurgent positions, trying to suppress their fire long enough for her squad to reorganize. Around her, other Marines were also fighting back, but she could hear shouts indicating that some had been wounded in the initial explosion and gunfire. The radio was filled with urgent communications as other units reported they were also under attack. The entire operation had been a trap designed to ambush multiple American teams simultaneously. Captain Rodriguez's voice cut through the chaos, ordering all units to establish defensive positions and calling for immediate backup and medical evacuation. Sarah could hear the strain in his voice as he tried to coordinate the response while under heavy enemy fire. A bullet struck the concrete inches from Sarah's head, sending sharp fragments into her face. She wiped blood from her cheek and continued firing, knowing that stopping to treat minor wounds could be fatal. Her squad leader was shouting orders, trying to organize their defense while calling for covering fire. Sarah could see insurgents moving between buildings, attempting to surround their position. She aimed carefully and fired, watching one figure fall before disappearing behind a wall. The sound of rocket-propelled grenades whistling overhead added another layer of terror to the battle. One exploded against a nearby building, showering the Marines with debris and dust. Sarah realized their position was becoming untenable as insurgents closed in from multiple directions. They needed to move to a more defensible location, but leaving their cover meant exposing themselves to intense crossfire from enemies who knew the terrain better than they did. Sarah spotted movement in a second-story window across the alley. A sniper was taking position, and from that angle he would have clear shots at her entire squad. She aimed her rifle and fired 3 quick shots, shattering the window and forcing the sniper to take cover. However, she knew he would be back, and next time he might not miss. The situation was deteriorating rapidly, and they needed help soon or they would be overwhelmed by superior numbers and positioning. Corporal Martinez, the Marine next to Sarah, suddenly cried out and fell backward. A sniper bullet had found its mark, striking him in the shoulder and spinning him around. Sarah crawled over to him, pulling him behind better cover while maintaining pressure on his wound. His injury was serious but not immediately life-threatening if they could stop the bleeding and get him medical attention. However, getting medical evacuation in their current situation seemed impossible. The firefight intensified as more insurgents joined the battle. Sarah could hear the distinctive sound of AK-47 rifles mixed with heavier machine gun fire. The enemy had prepared for this ambush carefully, positioning weapons and fighters to create overlapping fields of fire that made movement extremely dangerous. Every few seconds, bullets would strike their concrete barrier or whine overhead, reminding them how precarious their situation had become. Sarah's ammunition was running low, and she knew the other Marines were facing the same problem. They had prepared for a quick arrest operation, not an extended firefight against a large force of insurgents. She counted her remaining magazines and realized they might have to consider surrendering or attempting to break out of the ambush. Neither option offered much hope for survival, but staying in their current position would eventually lead to being overrun when their ammunition ran out completely. The mission briefing on November 15th seemed routine at first glance. Intelligence reports suggested a high-value target was hiding in a residential compound in eastern Fallujah. The target was believed to be a bomb maker, responsible for several roadside explosions that had killed American soldiers and Iraqi civilians. Sarah's squad was tasked with surrounding the building while another team made the actual arrest. It should have been a straightforward operation, completed before sunrise. Sarah studied the aerial photographs of the target building during the briefing. Something felt wrong, though she couldn't put her finger on exactly what bothered her. The compound was larger than typical residential buildings, with multiple exits and a complex layout that would make clearing it challenging. The intelligence seemed too convenient, too neat. In her experience, valuable insurgents didn't usually stay in obvious locations where they could be easily trapped. Captain Rodriguez noticed Sarah's concern during the mission planning session. When he asked for her assessment, she expressed her worries about the operation. The building's location, the timing of the intelligence, and the layout all suggested this might be a trap rather than a legitimate target. However, orders from higher command were clear. This mission was a priority, and they had to move quickly before the target escaped. The squad prepared for the mission with extra care. Sarah checked her equipment twice, ensuring her rifle was clean and her ammunition was properly loaded. She packed additional medical supplies, a habit she had developed after seeing too many Marines wounded by hidden bombs and sniper fire. Her squad mates noticed her increased attention to detail, which made them more careful about their own preparations. In combat zones, one person's paranoia could save everyone's lives. They departed the base at 3 a.m, moving through the dark streets in armored vehicles. The city was quiet except for distant sounds of generators and barking dogs. Sarah watched through her night vision goggles as they approached the target area, scanning rooftops and windows for any signs of enemy activity. The normal nighttime routine of Fallujah seemed undisturbed, which only increased her suspicion that something was wrong with this mission. The convoy stopped 6 blocks from the target building, and the Marines began their approach on foot. Sarah's squad was responsible for securing the north side of the compound, preventing anyone from escaping through a small alley that connected to the main street. The plan called for them to move into position quietly, then wait for the assault team to begin their operation. Communication would be maintained through radio headsets, allowing coordination between all units involved in the mission. As they moved through the narrow streets, Sarah noticed unusual details that increased her concern. Windows that should have had curtains were completely dark, and she didn't see the normal signs of family life that characterized residential neighborhoods. No clothes hanging on lines, no children's toys in doorways, no cooking smells in the air. The area felt abandoned, as if civilians had been warned to leave before something dangerous happened. Sarah's squad reached their assigned position without incident. They had a clear view of the north exit from the compound, positioned behind concrete barriers that would provide protection if shooting started. Sarah used her binoculars to study the target building more carefully, noting the placement of windows, doors, and potential sniper positions. The structure looked like it had been modified recently, with new concrete work around. Some windows that could be firing ports. The radio crackled with updates from other teams as they moved into position. Everyone reported normal conditions with no signs of enemy activity. The assault team was preparing to breach the main entrance, waiting only for confirmation that all escape routes were secured. Sarah's squad leader gave the all-clear signal, though Sarah continued to feel uneasy about the entire situation. Her instincts had saved lives before, but sometimes military operations required accepting calculated risks. At 4:30 in the morning, the assault team reported they were ready to begin. Sarah adjusted her position to get a better view of the alley while maintaining cover behind the concrete barrier. Her rifle was ready, safety off, finger near the trigger, but following proper discipline. Around her, the other Marines in her squad were equally prepared, eyes scanning their assigned areas for any movement that might indicate enemies trying to escape or reinforcements trying to approach the target building. Marine Sergeant Sarah Chun had always been different from other kids in her small Ohio town. While her friends played with dolls, she collected military action figures and read books about famous battles. Her father, a Vietnam veteran, would find her in the garage practicing combat roles and pretending to clear rooms with a toy rifle. When she turned 18, nobody was surprised when she walked into the Marine recruiting station on Main Street. The year was 2004, and the Iraq War was raging. Sarah had completed her basic training with flying colors, earning the respect of her drill instructors who rarely praised anyone. She was tough, smart, and had an unusual ability to stay calm under pressure. Her marksmanship scores were among the highest in her class, and she had a natural talent for tactical thinking that impressed her superiors. When Sarah received her deployment orders to Iraq, her mother cried for 3 days straight. Her father, however, looked at her with pride mixed with worry. He knew what war could do to a person, but he also knew his daughter was built for challenges that would break others. Sarah promised her family she would come home, a promise that seemed simple at the time but would soon be tested in ways she never imagined. The flight to Iraq felt endless. Sarah sat with her unit, watching her fellow Marines try to sleep or nervously check their equipment for the 100th time. She stared out the small window at the desert below, wondering what awaited them in this ancient land that had become a modern battlefield. The stories from other units were mixed. Some talked about successful missions and grateful Iraqi civilians, while others whispered about roadside bombs and ambush that came from nowhere. Sarah's unit was assigned to Forward Operating Base Liberty, just outside the dangerous city of Fallujah. The base was a small island of American military might surrounded by a sea of uncertainty. Concrete barriers, razor wire, and guard towers created a fortress-like atmosphere, but everyone knew that determined enemies could strike anywhere, anytime. The heat was overwhelming, even in the early morning, and the dust seemed to get into everything: weapons, food, and lungs. During her first week, Sarah learned the reality of combat operations. Unlike the training exercises back home, real missions had unpredictable elements that no simulation could replicate. The local population was a mixture of people who welcomed American presence and others who saw them as invaders. Telling the difference between friend and enemy was often impossible until shots were fired. Sarah quickly adapted to this environment, earning the nickname Ice from her squadmates for her ability to stay cool during tense patrols through Fallujah's narrow streets. Her commanding officer, Captain Rodriguez, noticed Sarah's potential early on. She had an instinct for reading dangerous situations and could spot trouble before it developed into something deadly. During routine patrols, she would often point out suspicious activities or locations that other Marines had missed. Her recommendations saved lives and prevented several potential ambushes. Within 2 months, she had become an unofficial scout for her unit, often taking point during dangerous missions into the heart of insurgent territory. The city of Fallujah was unlike anything Sarah had experienced. Ancient buildings mixed with modern structures, creating a maze of streets, alleyways, and rooftops that provided countless hiding places for insurgents. The civilian population lived in constant fear, caught between American forces trying to maintain order and insurgent groups fighting to drive out the occupiers. Children would wave at Marines during the day, while their neighborhoods echoed with gunfire at night. Sarah's squad developed a reputation for successful missions with minimal casualties. They had cleared dozens of suspected insurgent hideouts, captured valuable intelligence, and helped establish security in several neighborhoods. Sarah's careful approach and tactical awareness had become legendary among other units at the base. Young Marines would seek her advice before their first combat missions, and even experienced veterans respected her judgment about tactical situations.